Working Cows Podcast, episode 304. This episode is brought to you by Sunshine Bible Academy. This episode is also brought to you by Ranching.fyi.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. It's Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows Podcast, recorded exclusively in the C90 Ocean Minerals Studios. And this episode is brought to you by Sunshine Bible Academy.
My name is Riley Nelson, and I grew up on a ranch in northeast Montana. I am part of the 2023 graduating class at Sunshine Bible Academy. I was homeschooled until my sophomore year when my family and I decided that SBA was the right next step for me. I've grown so much in my relationship with God, my relationship with my peers, and academically. The opportunities I have for hands-on agriculture classes, like animal science, have directed me towards my college major. Participating in FFA events has been extremely useful, and I especially enjoy the real-life application. I have learned many things at this school that I can take with me after I graduate, and I am so thankful for the teachers and staff for making that possible, and to God for allowing me to come here. I believe that He has truly blessed this school and its mission, and it is wonderful to be a part of it. Sunshine has had a huge impact on my life and has blessed me in more ways than I could have imagined.
Very excited to be joined by Dallas Mount today. We are going to talk to Dallas about what do we do with our profit? What is our profit for? And we've danced around this issue, but I came to my attention, or I began to realize that I've never had anybody from RMC, Ranch Management Consultants, the company that runs the Ranching for Profit School and the Executive Link program. I've never had anybody from that organization break down the 3 secrets of increasing profit. And so we're going to talk about that, but then we're going to talk about what is your profit for, because we're in some unique times in the cattle industry. And so we're probably going to see some profitable businesses. Well, when that happened previously, some people made mistakes. And so we want to talk about what do we do with our profit and how do we avoid those same mistakes that we made previously. So as you know, Dallas is the CEO of Ranch Management Consultants. As I said, the company that runs the Ranching for Profit School and the Executive Link program. So Dallas has been a friend of the show since the very beginning of the show. He was actually the inspiration of the show, the Working Cows Podcast. So really appreciate him and very excited to be joined by him once again. Dallas, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows Podcast.
Thanks, Clay. Great to be back. Excited to visit with you again.
I told you in the email setup to this that this is the longest mount drought we've had in the history of the Working Cows Podcast, so I figured we better fix that.
Well, maybe your listenership has gone up substantially since I've been on, so maybe there's a correlation there.
But anyways, what I wanted to talk to you about today is kind of the idea of what is your profit for? And I think we're going to see some more profitable businesses in the next few months, and we all know input costs tend to rise following that. But first of all, I think where we should probably start is kind of as RMC conceives it, and I think as we've talked about, most businesses, I think when you start to look at what business is, the 3 secrets for increasing profit are kind of the same in all businesses. But let's talk about them first of all. Let's start there. What are the 3 secrets for increasing profit? And then we'll go from there.
Sure. Yeah. Appreciate the opportunity to talk about the 3 secrets. Yeah, this is pretty foundational to what we do at Ranching for Profit, is to break the business down economically and look at what's really going on inside the business from a value creation and value use standpoint. And as we start doing that, we need to put some things in some buckets and develop a shared language to start to understand the drivers of the business. So that leads us to the 3 secrets of increasing profit. Let me start with some definitions. The first thing is when you have a business, any business is going to have overhead costs. Okay, and I think of these as the cost of keeping the doors open on the place, right? So even if we didn't run cattle this year or didn't grow crops this year, but we kept the farm or ranch going, we didn't shut down the business, we're going to have costs that are happening even if we don't have a single unit on the place. So we tend to lump those types of costs in agriculture into two big buckets, land and labor. Okay, and land cost, if we wanted to break those things down, that's things like rents and upkeep. Okay, oftentimes people want to put mortgage payments and things like that in there. I can understand why people want to do that, but those are not necessarily economic costs, right? Those are cash costs, right? When you make a mortgage payment, you're trading that payments for some form of value, right? So that value isn't necessarily leaving your pocket. Cash is leaving your pocket, but value isn't necessarily, okay? But the rent, like, what your agriculture operation pays to operate on that land, that is, cash leaves your pocket and value leaves your pocket if you're actually paying rent, right? So that's one group of land costs, is the cost of rents. The other group of land costs is upkeep, right? So I rent a place up in the mountains west of Wheatland. So I pay cash rent, but I also pay all the upkeep on that place, right? So, different people have different arrangements there. But those are the two main types of land costs, and that's one of the overheads. The second grouping of overheads are labor, and labor can be broken down into people and things, right? Things is one of these highly technical terms you have to have a PhD to understand, right? So
is that post-hole digger or piled higher?
Post-hole digger. That's right.
PhD. Piled higher and deeper. I don't know which one it is. But.
Yeah, and actually, a post-hole digger is a thing, right? So, labor unit. Things. A labor unit, yeah. Things are the things that people use, right? So pickups, trailers, tractors, machines, right? All these things, if you think about them, actually do labor. Right, that's the purpose of having a thing, right? Horses that are used for the ranch; those are actually a labor cost. So people and things, and people costs are going to be, wages, benefits, housing, utilities for those houses, right? So payroll taxes, right? All those things are people costs. So you've got this big bucket of what we call overheads. And overheads are also what the economists call fixed cost, right? You often hear them say fixed cost. And broadly put, overheads are things that do not change as the units of production change, right? So if I add one more cow or farm one more acre of ground, is the depreciation on my pickup going to go up by one cost? Okay. No. It is the total labor unit, the total amount that I write for labor, is that going to go up by one? Okay. In most cases, the answer is no. Right. So overheads tend not to change as the units of production increase. So there's the first term that we need to talk about is overheads. Now, you see it all the time. When I was with the university, I used to have people do this, is we allocated overheads per unit. Right? We'd say, my total overhead costs are $100,000 and I run 100 cows, so I've got $1,000 of cost per cow. Right? And I can understand why people do that, but it's not a very good way to think about it. So that's one of the areas where ranching for profit deviates from a lot of the ways other people do it, is we are really specific. You keep those overheads as overheads. We don't allocate them out per unit because it makes you make bad decisions, right? You might look at those overhead costs and say, I've got $1,000 of cost per cow. The last thing I need to do is run more cows. Well, actually, it might be just the opposite. The first thing you need to do is run more cows because you've got this huge set of overheads, right? So we need to keep those overhead costs as overheads, okay? So think of the overhead cost as sitting in this big bucket. We can come back later and maybe talk about when we do allocate overheads. There's some very specific rules for that, but for the most part, the answer is don't do it, okay? The next term that we need to talk about is gross product, okay? Gross product. Gross product is the value of our production, okay? The value of our production. So if I've got 100 cows and I'm weaning off 93 calves out of those, okay, my gross product is not the value of those 93 calves. It's not that simple, okay? The gross product, the formula for gross product is sales minus purchases, and then we bring in an inventory adjustment. Okay, sales minus purchases, and then we use an inventory adjustment. So if I'm growing that cow herd or if I'm shrinking that cow herd, that inventory adjustment is going to accomplish that. Okay, gross product is the value that I created. Let me give you a really simple example of gross product. If I buy $100,000 of stocker cattle in the spring, and I run those cattle till the fall, they're going to gain weight, I hope. Some of them are probably going to die. Right, I go out there in the fall, I gather up all those stocker cattle, and I take them to and sell them, and I get $130,000 for everything that survived that I was able to find. Right, my gross product is the $30,000. Right, that's the value I created. Your gross sales is going to be $130,000. Right, I sold $130,000, but I bought $100,000 worth of that value at the beginning of the year. Right. So my gross product is the value I created. Right. So in a cow-calf business or any other type of business, it's sales minus purchases with the inventory adjustment. Okay. So that's gross product. So the next thing we need to talk about is direct cost. Okay. So direct cost is just really simple. It's the cost that goes up every time a unit of production increases. Okay. So if we think about the cow, every time I run one more cow, this cost goes up by one. So the easy ones to think about that fall into those buckets are feed, vet, are all your health costs for those animals. Marketing commissions, right? I sell one more calf, I pay one more marketing commission. Trucking costs to some degree. I raise another this, I need one more truck to haul them, right? So those are the main ones that come across as direct costs. Okay. So we've got two buckets of costs. It can either be an overhead or it can be a direct cost. And then we've got our gross product, which is the total value we created. Okay. Now, here's where we might want to pull out a pen if you're listening to this while you drive down the road. Okay. The next term we need to talk about is gross margin. And you hear this thrown around a lot, okay, but I don't think a lot of people actually understand what it means. If we take our gross product, which is the value of our production, so write GP, and in parentheses, you might write value of production. Okay. If we take our gross product and we subtract our direct costs, okay, so GP minus DC, all of our direct costs, okay, that gives us gross margin. Okay, gross margin. Sometimes your accountant will call that gross profit. Okay, but it's not profit, it's margin. Okay. Gross margin. So gross margin is the money left over to pay your overheads and for profit. Okay. So if I've got $100,000 of gross product, there's $30,000 of direct costs, then I've got $70,000 of gross margin. So that's the money I've got left over to pay all my overhead costs and for profit. Okay. So that's the way we look at that. Now, we need to go one step further. Gross margin alone doesn't tell us a whole lot. Okay. If we just look at that number, like $70,000, okay, that's useful, but it doesn't tell you a whole lot about the business. When we take gross margin and we divide it by the number of units, okay, if we're talking about a cow herd, let's go gross margin per cow, okay. Now that's going to be a pretty useful number, okay. So let's say my gross margin per cow is $500, okay. Gross margin per cow, gross margin per unit. If I'm farming, I'm going to take my gross product from that acre minus my direct costs, seed, fertilizer, chemical, right, all those things. And now I'm going to have gross margin. Divide it by the units in the farm we usually look at as the acre. So gross margin per acre. Okay. What that tells you, if you stop and think about it, that number tells you the economic efficiency of that production unit. Okay. The economic efficiency of that production unit. Because it's the value we created minus the costs that are tied to those units. That gives us the economic efficiency of that production unit. Gross margin per unit. Okay, it gives you the economic efficiency of the production unit. So if on my example of the cow, okay, if I have a $500 per cow, and let's say let's say I'm doing two calving seasons. I'm doing a spring herd and a fall herd. Okay, So I've calculated my gross margin per unit of my spring herd is $500 per cow. And I do the same thing on my fall herd, and I find that my gross margin per unit on my fall herd is $250 per cow. Then what that tells me is, boy, those spring cows are twice as good at creating value than those fall cows, right? So that's an important thing to know. I mean, golly, you got to know what things you're doing and how they are at creating value, right? So if you're farming, my corn's doing this gross margin per acre, right? This other crop over here is doing this gross margin per acre, right? That's an important thing to know. And it's been a frustration of mine in agriculture. We don't. It's becoming more popular thanks to shows like yours, but in most of agriculture, we don't have the language to talk that. Right? We talk weaning weights, or we talk, how many, what our weaning percentage was, or we talk what we got for our calves, right? None of those things are correlated to profit. Right? Gross margin per cow is correlated to profit. I mean, that essentially is saying, right, what's working. Okay. So that's now I've kind of laid the foundation for the three secrets, right? So we've got our language, we've got overhead costs, we understand what a gross margin per unit is. Okay. So the three secrets for increasing profit. Number one is to reduce overheads. Are there ways to lean the business up that allow us to do what we do, but not needing all these overhead costs that are leaching down the business? Okay. So there's strategy number one, is to find ways to reduce overheads. Strategy number two, how do we improve the gross margin per unit? Okay. If you can come to me with saying, hey, here's something I can do that takes my $250 gross margin cow, and maybe by either fixing that or by doing something else, I can turn that to a $500 gross margin per cow. Okay. That's another way to improve the business. The third way of doing it is to increase turnover. Turnover is a fancy way of saying throughput through the business, right? What's the throughput of my business? So if I've got a something that's running at $300 gross margin per unit, okay, but I can do that 3 times a year. I can do 3 turns a year on that, okay? Or I've got something running at $500 gross margin per unit, but I only get to do 1 of those a year, right? That thing with the lower gross margin with more turnover is more profitable. Okay, so turnover and gross margin kind of work hand in hand. But the whole point of the three secrets is the limiting factor for your business is going to come down to one of those three things. Right? The biggest issue in your business is either that you need to focus on finding ways to reduce the overheads, or maybe your gross margin per unit stinks and you need to come up with strategies to fix your gross margin per unit. Or you need to look at ways to increase turnover, right? One of those three things is the biggest limiting factor in your business. And what we often see is, without knowing this, without having your business broken down economically, you don't know which of those three things it is. So you're just out there shooting in the dark, right? Somebody's a well-intended smart manager might be trying to work on, what protein supplement they're using or what mineral program they're using. And they might have an amazing gross margin per unit, right? But their overheads are killing them. Right, and they're spending their limited amount of management time working on the wrong things. Okay, so what the three secrets does is it helps give management focus as to where is the issue, and now you can say, okay, this business has a turnover issue, so now we need to work on ways to do that. Or this business has an overhead. Let me give you one more example that we see so often. People get excited about soil health and about grazing management, and I do too. Right, I love this stuff. But somebody goes to a grazing school or something, and they come back and they go, oh man, this stuff's awesome. I'm going to build soil health. I'm going to get good at my grazing. I'm going to double the number of cows we run on this ranch. And I come to them, I'm like, whoa, let me see your gross margins, right? Well, we don't need that stuff. We're excited about soil health. We're going to build. No. Let me see your gross margins. Oh, your cows have a negative $100 gross margin. So for every cow you run, you lose $100 in gross margin, and you're going to double the number of cows you run. Okay, that's a really dangerous thing, right? That business is going to go broke faster. So it's very important that you can put your finger on which of the three secrets you need to address, because that business that I just gave you that's focused on building soil health and grazing, that's the last thing they need to worry about. They need to fix the model of what they're running. and make sure that whatever they're doing has a good gross margin. Then go get bigger, right? Then go figure out how to add more units. So there's the 3 secrets in a nutshell.
Very good. I had that down as a note that more turnover on a poor gross margin per unit in enterprise means you go broke faster.
Exactly.
And so maybe, like you got to get those things. And then another note I took there was one of the things that I think you mentioned after your time in Australia was the lack of, or the low overhead way that they run businesses there. Like you talked about going into the shop and you're just like, you think of going into the shop in an American ranch and all the stuff, and you go into a shop on an Australian ranch and there isn't all the stuff. Is that kind of...
You got it. There's ways to, you can have a high overhead business that works, right? I mean, I'm not going to say that there's no way to do it, but there's a heck of a lot more lean businesses that are working well than there are these other ones. And, I've been quoted as saying, I think on your show, that hay fed per cow is a really big metric for profitability, right? So think about this in terms of overheads. Right? Ignore the cost of the hay for right now. But if you and I went and drove into the yard of a 1,000 cow ranch that never fed hay, right? And then we looked at the stuff that's on that ranch, right? Even counted the dollar signs that were floating around. And then at the very next stop we made is we drove into the yard of a 300 cow ranch that feeds hay 6 months out of the year, right? And we looked at the stuff and the amount of overheads required to do that, right? That's what we're talking about. So it's businesses that are structured to run without needing piles and piles of stuff.
And I think that another thing that is worth noting here is the direct costs, and that a lot of times people want to wage war on costs, but that's not always the place to start necessarily. Would you agree with that in your experience?
Absolutely, I would agree with that. Yeah, we have a lot of people that come to our stuff and they're like, hey, yeah, we're going to be the low cost producer. We're going to have the lowest cost we buy. I'm like, okay, we can look at it, but that might be dangerous, right? Sure, there's more businesses that are making profit, I think, at a low cost model, but there are some people that are really doing it well with putting some inputs into them, right? And I think the most important thing is the thoughtful use of those inputs. Right. There are always times when, if you can spend $1 here and pick up $6 on the backside, right, that make a lot of sense. But I think too oftentimes we're looking to justify our expenditures, right? Oh, hey, I want to do this, so I'm going to come up with reasons to do it anyway, right? Rather than letting the economics talk. So there is not a recipe on how to run a profitable ranch, right? I can't sit here and say, well, if you just calve in June and feed hay for 30 days, you'll have a profitable ranch. It doesn't work that way, right? Yeah, there's people that are calving in January and feeding 6 months out of the year that have a profitable ranch. Right, there's just not as many of them. So when we tend to group, right, we tend to draw some conclusions.
Let's take a quick break and hear from our sponsor today, Ranching.fyi. You've been told the importance of running a business, but do you still feel like your business isn't fully mature yet? Sure, you're profitable, you have a mission, but you can't get to that next level where things run smoothly and effectively. Wouldn't it be nice to have good people and good processes that can improve your operating rather than hinder it? Running a business doesn't have to be painful. You can take control. Let's work together to make that happen. Meet Right is a brand new online course offered by Ranching.fyi and Ranch Right LLC. In the course, you will learn the right way to lead meetings on your ranch that actually move the needle and set your operation up for success. If you're ready to maximize your meetings, then join Meet Right today and start doing meetings right. Classes kick off June 22nd with limited seats available, so sign up today at ranching.fyi/register. That's ranching.fyi/register.
And the reason I wanted to go through that exercise is basically to talk about gross margin, because I think that we're probably in a phase in the cattle cycle, and I think that's probably what it is, a phase in the cattle cycle where gross margin per unit is going to increase. And like I said on the front end, yes, probably some input costs are going to rise, to match that, but probably not as quickly. And there's probably going to be people who are sitting there with a little bit more cash in the bank than they have had. And I think a lot of times the impulse is, for one, I don't want to send that to the government, so I'm going to go out and buy something. And that's one impulse. And then, I think that the other impulse is to make some other improvements around the ranch. And so I think that's kind of what I wanted to talk to you about today is, what is profit for? We've talked about how to increase profit, but how do we go about determining what our profit is for? And then also, what are we doing with our profit in terms of making the business better?
This is important. So let's make a list of the broad categories of what we could do with profit. Okay. So, first of all, let's delineate that profit is not your wage, right? I think there's a lot of ranchers that think, oh, well, if there's profit left over at the end of the year, I finally got to pay myself a wage. No, you put your wage in, right? What would it cost to replace you? And that's what your business should pay you for. So, and then there's all the other costs of running the business. So let's say we paid all those costs, and at the end of the year, we had $100,000 profit. Okay. So what are the broad categories of what we could do with that profit? Okay. So I'm just going to make a general list here. I think probably the natural reaction is to go back in the business. Okay. So I'm going to put that down, back in the business. Another thing we could do with profit would be to build reserves, right? So we could just save it essentially, right? So build reserves. Another use of profit, and people often don't think about this, but this is a specific use of profit, is to pay down debt, right? So oftentimes for some people that are debt averse, if there's $100,000 left at the end of the year and we've still got some money out on the cattle note or whatever it might be, hey, let's clean that up, right? But that is a use of profit. Pay down debt, okay? So we got a few more to do. Back in this business is one place to put profit, or we could invest in another business. I'm going to say outside business. Okay. So we might say, well, our ranch is subjected to the droughts and market swings, so let's find something maybe that doesn't have the same risk to it. So maybe let's do some real estate investment or things like that, right? So outside businesses. And another use of profit would be enjoy it. Okay. And that's kind of associated with paying dividends, right? So if there's ownership, you might just say, okay, we're going to pay dividends, as a percent of ownership, and people can do it. Or enjoying it might be that the business does something for everybody. Hey, the business is going to take everybody to the NFR this year, right? Or whatever that might be. So that'd be another way of doing it. Okay, and then one more use of profit is to give it away. Give it away. Make donations to things you care about, right? So in those broad groupings, back in the business, building reserves, pay down debt, outside businesses, enjoy it, and give it away. That is 6 different classifications of profit. So, Clay, I forgot we're talking about agriculture. Oh, it all goes into one place. No questions asked. Where does it always go, Clay?
Into the business. Back
in the business, of course. Yeah, because you don't understand. We've got stuff we need, right? We've been this skid steer needs to be updated. Those corrals on the top of the hill back there, we've been wanting to add a whole other set of shipping facilities. The roof on this building needs to be replaced, right? So there's always a long list of things to do when we feel like we have some extra money at the end of the year. And I can understand there are reasonable arguments for all those things. But from the outside looking in, here's what I often see. I've got a business that if I'm speaking from kind of the outside looking into this ranch, I'm looking at a business that makes a 1 or 2% return on assets every year. And in those limited number of years when it actually does make a little bit of profit to get excited about, what do? We throw it back in a poorly performing business, oftentimes back into things that are not good at creating cash flow and at creating value. Right? So we compound the problem. We make the problem worse into the future. right? So that when these markets do turn around, and they will, I mean, is it going to be a year or 6 months or 2 years? I don't know, but it will turn around, right? The best cure for high prices is high prices, right? So so this thing's going to go, and so how could you make a reasonable argument that we need to invest a little bit of cash back into a poorly performing business, into things that don't produce cash flow, right? To me, that's pretty stupid. If I was sitting here looking at a business that produced a 20% return on investment, dependably, then I might be saying, hey, yeah, let's grow this thing, right? If this thing's working, let's turn the crank on it. Okay. But what we're often looking at is things that tie up huge amounts of capital and that return very little. And sometimes, if anything, I mean, sometimes there's oftentimes negative returns on investment on these things. So why would it make a reasonable argument that it should go back in the business? Okay. So I guess until you can show me that you fixed it and the thing is really cranking, I'm pretty apprehensive with people throwing profits back in the business. So that leaves a few other things. Building reserves, I think that's really smart. Here's an interesting question that I pose to a lot of ranches. How many days of operating cash do you have on hand? Okay. So if we were in a drought or if things got really tough, how many days could you keep the doors open on the place out of cash reserves before you'd have to go find another strategy? You'd have to sell something, you'd have to liquidate something, right? I think that's an important question. And what that right number there is very much an individual thing, right? Some people are very comfortable having that be fairly small. I, for one, am not. I think that right number is probably somewhere between 6 months and a year of cash reserves to have on hand. For one thing, that puts you in a position to take advantage of opportunities, right? So when something comes along, when this quarter comes up next to you, right, you can just snatch it up and not even worry about it, right? Figure it out later. When you hit a drought, you've got options that other people don't. When the neighbors are selling off cows because they're in a drought, right, or things like that, you've got an opportunity to take advantage of that and to put yourself in a position. So I think having cash reserves, that you can access very quickly is a smart thing to be, even if that means carrying more debt. Right? Sometimes people can't get past that. They think, well, I've got money, I need to pay down debt. Right? Let me tell you a little story about our business. When we hit COVID, I'd only had this business for a few months, and we just had one season behind us, and we hit COVID, and I didn't know if I was going to have any income for a year. Okay. And so here we're sitting in, and Dave Pratt was who I bought the company for. I think many of you guys know Dave, an amazing man, and I owe him a lot of money, right? And I just got one season behind me, and we were sitting on some cash, right? And I'm like, hey, this is pretty cool. We had a successful season. Maybe I should prepay Dave, right? And I was thinking that in my mind. Boy, am I glad I didn't. Okay. Because we had an extended period of time where it was pretty lean, right? Now, thankfully, we didn't have to go a full year without having income. And Dave was very generous, right? He called and said, hey, don't worry about me. You keep the doors open on the business, right? But it was, if I'd made the choice to pay down debt and instead of building cash reserves, I would have caused some sleepless nights to get even more sleepless. Right. So there's some real benefits of having reserves before you pay down debt. Having some outside businesses, I think that's a great idea. Right. Let's diversify where some of our income streams are coming from. I'm not saying we need to have 12 different things going on, but having 2 or 3 things that are working well and at scale. If most ranchers, I would say when you're looking for things to invest in, look for things that are really low from a time requirement, right? So I don't want to buy something that I've got to go out there every day and tend to, right? So what could I do? So oftentimes real estate investments make a lot of sense, like commercial properties or things like that, right? Maybe a car wash or something like that somebody else is running, right? So look at those kind of things. And then enjoying it and giving away, right? It sure is fun to find ways to do those two things. But I really want to caution people against the temptation is to throw it all back in the business. Really ask the questions beforehand of what are we going to do with profit? What's our strategy with it? These are great conversations to get the family around and put these things on the board and say, all right, here's all the uses of profit. If we made $100,000 next year, what do we want to do, right? Now maybe 20, 30, 40% of it needs to go back in the business. But 100% of it back in the business, I think that's a bad idea.
Right. Yeah. And I think that these are going to be somewhat subjective, right? I mean, these are going to be things that people have to decide in their business for their family. What is right? Is it to put it back in the business, build reserves, pay down debt, outside business investment, enjoy it or give it away? Those are going to change from my ranch to my neighbor's ranch. We're all going to have a different set of priorities that change the way we deploy these things, right?
Absolutely. I like to make a pie chart, right? So we get out a piece of flip chart paper and we're going to draw out a pie chart and say, okay, what percent of it do we think we should target for going back in the business, right? And I think that makes it a very nice visual pie chart, right? So some of these categories might be zeroed out, right? I mean, people might say enjoying it, that's what you do with your salary, right? The business isn't going to take people on vacations. That's for you to do for yourself. We're going to zero that one out. And I think that's a very reasonable argument, right? But yeah, I think it's the important thing is to have a conversation and do it beforehand, right? So that when that happens, how are most farms and ranches doing this? Dad decides what he spent it on a year before it's even made, right? And it's going back in the business, no questions asked, right? And there's no input from anybody. So I'd say this is a conversation point.
From your perspective, what are some of the things that you like to see as far as back in the business type of investments? I think that a lot of times we end up with a shiny new baler or a shiny new pickup sitting out in the driveway, and sometimes those things aren't generating a lot of return to the business. I mean, maybe you could make an argument for the baler over the pickup in that scenario, but what are some of the things that people should consider as far as good, judicious investments back into the business?
In short, it's things that produce cash flow. Most of these farms and ranches that we look at are enormously capital intensive and their cash flow stinks. Right. And a way to break that down is if you feel like you're wealthy on the balance sheet and broke at the bank, then this is what's going on. Is you've got a huge economic this piece, but it's not producing cash flow. Right. So if you're going to deploy capital into something else, let's deploy it into things that produce cash flow. Okay, and what we teach people at the school is let's look for things that produce 100% return in 1 year. So that bar might seem really high, and it's intended to, right? 100% return in 1 year. Okay, so here's the reason why we say that. If I locked you in a room and I said you're not coming out to eat until you come up with an idea that produces 100% return on capital in 1 year, you're going to find it pretty quick, right? If we let ourselves pick whatever new shiny thing we want next, and now we have to come up with a justification for it, we can do that, right? So, and that's what we tend to do in these businesses. We justify whatever thing we want, right? Rather than actually forcing ourselves to say, okay, I've got a business that really stinks from a cash flow perspective. If I'm going to put new capital in my business, then let's look for things that are actually good at producing cash flow. Okay. So oftentimes, just to give you some examples of that, fence and water developments do this oftentimes, right? If I'm going to put a water on a corner of the ranch that typically has had no water, right? And maybe it's going to cost me $10,000, $20,000 to put that in. But in year one, I pick up $20,000 worth of grazing, right? There's 100% return on 1 year, right? A set of portable scales for a stocker operator, right? things like that, right? That they can say, hey, I'm going to be better able to market my cattle. I'm going to minimize shrink on them, right? And I'm going to be able to make that 100% return in 1 year. Okay. The things that are generally the worst at producing return on investment are heavy machines, right? The big stuff. I mean, you're oftentimes people sit down and put those things in there. Their return often stinks. Now, I'm not saying that's always the case, right? But in farms and ranches, it's often the case.
Yep. And I think when it's not the case, it's because it's an exceptional enterprise. I mean, not even just exceptionally run, but the example I always go back to is the example of people who are making small square bales and selling them for like $8 or $10 a bale to people on the Front Range in Colorado. That business works. But if you're making big round bales and sell them to your neighbor or even to your cows for $50 a bale, that business in a lot of times, in a lot of cases, doesn't seem to work very well.
Yeah. I completely agree with you. So if you could show me that, hey, I'm gonna buy this $100,000 piece of machine and we're gonna turn the crank on this thing and I'm all for it, right? But let's just not sit there and come up with excuses of why we need this other big monument to tax avoidance that's going to suck cash out of the business instead of actually produce cash. And that's what we often see.
Yeah, I will put in the show notes page for today, workingcows.net/304, workingcows.net/304. I'll put in the show notes page for today my episode with Dave Pratt titled Monuments to Tax Avoidance. So we'll
Wonderful. Good. Love it.
So yeah, you'll be able to go back and listen to that one too. A couple of things I think as we point towards wrapping up here is, right at the outset on this conversation we talked about overheads, and one of the things you talked about as an overhead is people and their wages and paying yourself. And I think a lot of times we have gotten to the point in our businesses where we think, oh, I'm making extra money, I'll pay myself this year, rather than, no, I was paying myself all along. So I think just maybe that bears repeating, deserves to be said again, as far as the paying yourself was something you were doing before you made a profit. Profit is in excess of what you were paying yourself.
Exactly. So what we recommend folks do is, if your business is not currently giving you, so ask the question, what would it cost to replace the work that I'm doing in this business? Okay. So if I had to hire somebody else to do this, what would I pay them? Now you have to be fair, right? If you're living in a house that the ranch provides, if the ranch is paying all your utilities and all those kind of things, don't double count that, right? Say, okay, I'm getting that job. So if I was giving this to an employee, what would I have to give them in a cash wage, right? So when you have that number, if you're not currently paying yourself a wage, you need to start tomorrow, right? Start writing that wage, and it moves from your business account. It's a physical check or a direct deposit, or however you want to set up. It moves from your business account to your personal account. Okay, now we do this at Ranch Management Consultants. I take a wage from the company. Okay, now if your business, a lot of people are going to say, well, wait, my farm or ranch can't afford to pay me. Okay, I understand. It can't afford to pay you yet. Okay, so if that's the case, when your business needs money, now you can write a loan to your business. Okay, so you take it out of your personal account and you give your business a loan, and you record it on the books at what date that loan was, whatever interest you're going to charge yourself, and you put it in there. Okay, this is going to start to change your behavior and change the way you run your business, right? If you just keep waiting around and saying, well, I'll just live my life out of whatever's left, right? Well, that's when you start saying, well, okay, my spouse has to work in town, and now I better go pick up a job doing this because there's just not anything left to put food on the table and to pay the light bill, right? So it's a change. It's a minor change, but boy, is it a big change. So if somebody's listening to this that does not currently do this, start today. Your spouse will thank you. And even bigger down the road, I assume a lot of you folks are working for a farm or ranch that you don't own all of it. So if you have cousins and uncles and aunts that own part of this thing, okay, your unpaid labor, they're not going to recognize it the same when it's time to settle this thing up, right? you're going to say, well, but wait, I've got 20 years of deferred wages in this thing. And they're going to go, no, you don't. I don't see anything. Right. But if you've got actual loans that you've given back the business, okay, then there's something documentable that you can track. Okay.
Sure. And I think that the other thing, and we've kind of touched on it as well, but the other thing that I think bears repeating is that in a scenario like this, it's okay to pay taxes.
Yeah.
It's not that buying a piece of equipment, especially buying a piece of equipment for a poorly performing enterprise, is maybe not a better investment than just paying the taxes. Would you agree with that?
Exactly. I 100% would. And so as we were talking about building reserves, investing in outside businesses, in order to do that, you're going to have to pay some tax, right? That's just part of the game. So yeah, I bet you and Dave hammered this pretty hard in that episode that you referenced.
Yep. And like I said, it'll be there in the show notes page for today. So, Dallas, this is coming out in early June. Anything pressing that you want to promote, or anything you got coming up that you're excited about?
Yeah, if I could get one more thing in here, Clay, that's maybe before we go to that. So I'm getting a little long in the tooth now, and I have less hair and more gray hair now. I've been here, done that. Okay, listen here, Sonny, pull up a chair. Right, I'm getting ready to give you one of these lectures. Okay, we're heading for a time. I mean, I'm already seeing the numbers come in. Right, the prices people are getting for calves, things are going to be pretty hot in this thing for a bit. Let's not make the same mistakes we made last time, right? The last time we were at this is the decisions that a lot of the ranches that I saw made are what caused problems for the next decade that they had to dig out of. Okay. So I want to warn people to not make those same mistakes. Okay. What I saw people do last time is when we got these calves are selling for this, right? And all of a sudden there's all this money coming into these ranches, right? What people did is they said, finally, it's where it needs to be, right? The calf prices are finally where they deserve to be, right? Should have made this stuff. And then we started seeing, okay, let's upgrade this piece, right? Let's upgrade that piece. Junior, come on home, right? We've got 200 cows here, but we can now feed you and your spouse and have a house for you guys, right? And what we saw is the overheads in these ranches just shot up. And, everybody now sits back and goes, oh, it's the feed salesman. He's charging too much for his feed. What it mostly was is people did it to themselves, right? They added all these overheads to their business that they thought, well, we've had 2 good years of calf prices. It's going to stay here. So in some cases, we saw overheads double and even triple, right? When in these periods of high prices. And then the prices went down, and now we've got these, they're overheads for a reason, right? And so now you're sitting there stuck on all this stuff, and you've got to make payments on it. You've got to pay repair bills and maintenance, or if Junior quit their job and moved back to the ranch, right? It's not like you can easily just say, well, that didn't work. Go find another job in town, right? So what I want to do is really caution people about, growing their businesses, growing the overheads of their business out of whack, because that's what I saw happen last time. So don't make the mistake that we saw happen in this last round of this, and be ready to capitalize on it. There's going to be huge opportunities in this thing for people that are paying attention, right? But the way you capitalize on it is you sell. Right. So when things are overvalued in markets, you sell them. If that cow is worth $3,000 today, would you buy it for $3,000? Right. If the answer is no, then you should sell it for $3,000 and go make another one. Right. But everybody gets this thing that, it's just got to keep going up. And boy, is that seductive to fall into. So I just want to encourage people to take advantage of things when they're right.
Very well said, and important for people to hear. So yeah, appreciate that very much. Like I said, anything you wanted to promote specifically, or anything that you've got coming up?
Yeah, so we've got some Ranching for Profit schools coming up. Unfortunately, the next one is already sold out. That one's in Billings in June, but you can get on the list for the other ones that are coming up. We've got one in September in Kennewick, Washington. We've got the Phoenix, Arizona school. We're going to be back in Texas. Both those are in December. We've been seeing Ranching for Profit schools sell out quite a ways in advance, so I would encourage people to get on that. We are upping the cost of the school effective the 1st of August, but we're allowing people to register at the current rate up until August 1. So if you want to go to a school that's in January, February, you can register now and lock in current pricing, and the new pricing will adjust the 1st of August. So if you've been thinking about coming to a school, there's no time like the present to get on the list and get your butt to class. So we've got all our young adult Ranching for Profit workshops coming up this summer. Those are a highlight for us. We love doing those. So this is ranchers ages 18 to 25. We do anywhere from 3 days to 5 days, depending on which school it is. We've got the one that we're doing in-house is in June in Montana. That one's only got 4 seats left as of today. So probably by the time this comes out, it'll be sold out. But South Dakota is doing their own, the South Dakota Grasslands Coalition. So go on their website and you can sign up to come to our South Dakota Young Adult School. And then the Nebraska Grazing Lands Coalition is also doing one that they're coordinating and setting that all up, and that's in July. So you can go on their website and register for them. And all those things are linked on our website at ranchingforprofit.com as well.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things I was going to say too as well is that I think that one of the few places I am aware of where you could go and have these kind of conversations with somebody from your business and a few other businesses around the table is the Executive Link program. And so I think this would be a really great year if you're an RFP alumni, or to become an RFP alumni, so you could get into the EL program and go and have some of these conversations about what are we going to do with this extra money, rather than, buy something with it. And you would have 6 months or so from the time this releases to get through the class and get into EL, get on a board, and have that conversation and make some of those decisions before tax time comes around and you're scrambling to figure out what you're going to do. So I would you agree with that? That's one of the few places to have those kind of conversations that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up, Clay. Yeah, I don't know what kind of business would not benefit from a group of peer advisors that you're having strategic level conversations with around your businesses. I just actually, we talked to a long-term EL member yesterday, and he said I finished the school, and he said my wife and I were going to go home and implement for a year before we got into EL. And he said, as I look back, he's been in EL now, I think 7 or 8 years. He said, as I look back, that 1 year of implementing, he said, I can put my finger on it. He said, we made a $300,000 mistake. And he said, if I had been in an EL board, they would not have let me make that mistake. He said, they would have stopped me from doing it. So he said that 1 year of not getting an EL cost me $300,000 because I was thinking I needed to go it alone and implement before I got on a board. He said, I felt like I needed to be a big time ranch before I joined EL. And he went out and made some major purchases, which he said he was just stupid to do. But anyway, I really appreciated that story because I could put my finger on it. It was $300,000 it cost me by not joining EL that 1 year.
And I think that's one of the things, you will never be a big time ranch if you don't start acting like one today.
You got it. Well said.
All right, Dallas. Well, thank you so much for your time today.
You bet, Clay. Always good to talk with you. Take care.
Very good stuff there, as always, with Dallas. Really appreciate him taking the time and pointing some of those things out. Very much looking forward to the next episode of the Working Cows podcast. We're going to have an episode with Gabe Brown and Alan Williams again for our series that we've been doing with Understanding Ag, and we're going to talk to those two individuals, those two gentlemen, about how we make sure that we're matching our management to our context, and that we don't become prescriptive with our management, but that we remain adaptive, and that we don't try to apply a system that will cause less diversity to be implemented in our system. And in full disclosure, this was inspired by a conversation I had with Gabe, where I pitched to him the idea that I was going to use a twice over rotation this year. And he said he just didn't think that was going to offer the kind of rest that we needed to increase diversity here. And so we're going to talk to him about why he said that, why he thinks that, and kind of some of the ways that we can go about making sure that we remain adaptive rather than becoming prescriptive. So we'll see you again real soon for another episode of the Working Cows Podcast.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.